a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashey Berges.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashey Berges. Now, on today's show, we're going to be talking about unconditional self-love. We're going to be talking about caring about ourselves and living in that honest truth. You know, I find that many of us don't think about that. We talk about loving other people. We talk about getting into romantic relationships with someone else and, you know, having that feeling and finding that love and finding that connection. We talk about dealing with relationship issues and problems and overcoming toxic relationships. We think about how to make a relationship work. You know, some of us out there are dating right now and we're trying to meet other people and learn about people. And it's interesting how we could put so much effort into learning about someone else, but have we really gone inside of ourselves to take that effort for ourselves? You know, I think most of us would have to say no. I did something that was very different years and years ago is I took a year off. Obviously, I worked and I did what I had to do. I didn't take a year off from society, but I took a year off from dating to really get to know who I was and to understand what I needed to do to let go of the things in my life that were causing me to not love myself unconditionally because I was judging myself. I didn't feel good enough. I had a low self-esteem. I had a low self-worth. And I didn't believe in myself. And those things are very important to think about because many of you out there right now listening to the show and listening to Live Your True Life Perspectives don't care enough about yourself and don't love yourself, and you happen to be your absolute worst judge and worst critic. And if you've listened to my show more than a half a time, you know that I always, well, sometimes, I don't ever like to say always and I don't ever like to say never, but more often than not, I've made the comment, you come in on this world on your own and you leave on your own. And the reason why we come in this world on our own is because we're here to learn something. And the main thing that we're supposed to learn is how to unconditionally love ourselves. So, you know, on the show, I look for people that understand subject matters to an extensive degree, that can take the thought processes and multiply those and really take these ideas to just another level in its own. And guess what? I found one to do that today. So we've been talking about unconditional love, and that's powerful. And I found someone that has figured that out as well, has written a book about it, and has a lot of knowledge on this and can really convey it. So joining me live in studio today, Noemi Grace joins me live in studio today. She's a psychotherapist, a soul healer, and the author of the new book, An Intimate Dialogue with God. The Miraculous Power of Unconditional Self-Love. Noemi, it's great to have you in studio. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing really well, and it's great to be here with you, Ashey, to have, as you said earlier to me, someone else in the same tribe that recognizes the valuable, vital necessity of unconditional self-love if we want to live a fulfilling and happy life. Things out there aren't what's going to give it to us. It's going to be coming from within.
It certainly does, and it's very powerful stuff. I mean, coming from your perspective, you know, being a psychotherapist, and you know, I've read your book, and it's powerful, the story. You know, how did you stumble upon this? Because I know that, you know, you went through a situation September 11th. And it really hits you, which it did most Americans to the core. Tell our listeners about what happened and how you were inspired to change kind of lifestyles and to really focus on this unconditional love.
Sure. Happy to do that, Ashey. So on September 11th, 2001, I got stuck in this train station right just outside of Boston. And this is a very busy train station, and it was silent, and it was crowded. No one was talking. All you could hear were some sobs, a little crying here and there. But no, it was just this eerie silence, just penetrated with crying. And standing there in the platform, knowing what had just transpired, I just became so overwhelmed. And I had this experience where I felt not only my fear, but I felt like fear was coming at me from everyone else. I felt this overwhelming fear that I had never felt in my life. And I was shutting down internally, but then it was like a pilot light got turned on inside of me. And for reasons I can't even explain, I began to I said out loud on this silent platform, not screaming, just very softly, use me for the healing of the world. And I heard myself, didn't know where that came from, and I felt just a tiny bit better, so I kept saying, use me for the healing of the world, use me for the healing of the world. And I waited for the train, probably 45 minutes, and then I went home, and I was still distraught, so I went for a 3-hour hike, and the whole time, use me for the healing of the world, use me for the healing of the world. The world needs healing, and I am here. I was just completing, that was my last year of psychotherapy grad school. I was just completing my training and starting to practice in internships, and I just, all of a sudden, I wasn't that kind of person that volunteered myself for anything. And then I volunteered myself for something so huge. And I felt compassion, which I've learned is love and connection. And so I felt compassion for everyone that was there on the station. I felt compassion for myself. And I just really, it opened me to start to have a bigger concern and a bigger willingness to care. And in that caring eventually blossomed into the self-love and love of others. But at that point, I wasn't thinking about self-love. I was thinking about self-survival. And in that place of, I need to survive this, I offered to be of service.
That's powerful.
And surprise myself.
That's powerful stuff. I think that a lot of times, especially when we're in stressful situations like that, right, it's obviously about self-preservation. But I find that a lot of people just fall into that category more times than not. We're kind of looking at the surface. And like I was saying earlier, we don't really think about the unconditional self-love because we're too busy with responsibilities. We're too busy playing out this role in our life as well as dealing with our own relationships, that it becomes an issue and a problem that we don't really even focus on ourselves. We don't think about it. And so we kind of put ourselves on the back burner.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're taught, and especially us women, but some boys are taught this as well, is to everyone else is more important. Make sure you take care of them. A good person loves other people, even though we're told, love your neighbor as yourself. But if we're not self-loving, then that's a formula for not really liking our neighbors a whole lot. And for self-loathing, that's just going to offer a lot of discord with our neighbors, with our friends, with our colleagues. And so we don't think about ourselves. We have become externally focused. We've been socialized that way, and we have learned to be externally focused, outwardly focused until something within is really unhappy or dissatisfied. And so we can feel that inside of ourselves. We are looking outside. That's what we learn to do.
It's kind of like the only time that
love.
some people ever take consideration of themselves is when they're sick. Like when they're sick is the only time they slow down, and they have to be really extremely sick before they'll actually take care of themselves. And so what happens is it seems like most of the stuff that we feel is put on the back burner. And I find that the longer we wait and not deal with that, the more regret we're going to have later on in life. It's like we can all stop at one point and realize this, but we've got to get to a certain point, because I think that our whole life is meant to understand who we are and to accept ourselves. And I think that when we miss that, we miss the boat of why we're here in the first place.
Absolutely. And there's a sentence, there's a statement in my book that says, if you do not love yourself, you miss the entire point of life. I mean, to know ourselves, to heal ourselves, to love ourselves. Yes, this is why we're here. We're not here to make sure the kids have all their activities, even though that's part of life, and that, the dinner's on the table and the bills are paid. And sure, you have to do those things, but the deep reason why we're here is about us. It is all about us. Learning to love ourselves, heal ourselves, even learning to like ourselves, and become ourselves, like being willing to be yourself in the world, to stand in the world as yourself. It's really powerful.
Very powerful. We'll be talking about more of this when we return, because we're going to be talking more about unconditional love. Noemi's going to be talking about her human experiences of putting together this book and how it all came to pass, and what it really means to the reader as well. Stay tuned. If you haven't already, check out the website. Go to AsheyBerges.com, Ashey, Berges.com. New content up every week. And also don't miss YouTube. Just go to the YouTube channel. New video content every single week. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashey Berges, will be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashey.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashey Berges. On today's show, we're talking about self-love. Joining me in studio, Noemi Grace is talking about her recent book, An Intimate Dialogue with God, The Miraculous Power of Unconditional Self-Love. She's a psychotherapist and a soul healer, and we've been talking about the power of unconditional love. So, Noemi, when you were writing this book, first off, how did you receive the messaging or put together this book in the first place?
Sure. So, I never sat down with an intention to write this book. I actually always felt that there was a book in me, and I've had a few books that I wrote years ago that are on the shelf, just sitting there, that were never published. So what happened to me, one day out of the blue, I was on my elliptical, and I was listening to this affirmations recording, and it was, "You're unstoppable. You go, girl. You got this. Don't let anything stop you." It was all this pump you up kind of thing. And I'm listening to this, and I'm going, really moving on that elliptical. And then all of a sudden, the whole recording just stopped, and there was silence. And then out of the air, really, I heard at the same volume as the recording. I'm hearing, "Love is the fabric of freedom. Forgiveness paves the way to freedom. You will know when you are free, when there's nothing left to forgive, because you see through the eyes of love." I just was absolutely blown away. I got off the elliptical and wrote this down while I remembered it. And in that instant, I knew that this wasn't coming from my mind. Like, this is not the kind of stuff I perseverated and ruminated on. It's not what was occupying my mind 24/7. So I knew that this was coming from someplace bigger than me. Didn't really know where it came from. Wrote it down. This was in March of 2012, and kind of went around continuing my life. And I would think about it every once in a while, and wondered, fabric of freedom. What interesting wording. And it wasn't until 3 years later, in January 1st, 2015, where I was just kind of fed up with the anxiety I was experiencing all the time in my life, where I just said, this year I will learn to not be anxious. I will learn to embrace what is and reclaim my joy. And when I wrote that down, and the next day I went and I read it, and then I started to just hear all of these wonderful things, more wonderful things like I had heard 3 years earlier. And I was hearing this when I would meditate. And when I would meditate, there was this voice that was so resonant and had said so many things about how you can love yourself and how important it is to love yourself and how to forgive yourself and so many wonderful, wonderful things. And I just started to write. And so I was in the silent place in meditation. I would hear it, and I started to write by hand in the journal. And months later, I had 3 or 4 journals, big ones, full. And I write very small, and it was just full with all of this, what I call divine goodness, this yumminess, this new way to see life and to see yourself. And so I was pretty sure I wasn't getting all of this, channeling all of this and receiving all of this just to put it in the journals, because I thought, this is all nice, but I'm guessing that there's a bigger audience for this. And I was told to put things in the book and to put them however I wanted to. And it was so much, it was 500. My wonderful husband transcribed my tiny handwriting that scribbles. It turned out to be over 500 type pages of material. So I thought, well, this is too much for one book. So I just went with what I had heard first, which is about self-love. And I said, the first book I want to do about self-love. And that just felt really good to me. So I pulled together all of the dialogue on unconditional self-love. And so the book, as you see it, Ashley, and as you've read it, wasn't delivered in that fashion. It was kind of one day about love, another day about forgiveness, another day about I'm upset with my husband, help me not kill him, that kind of a thing.
That's awesome.
And so it was just where I was. And so I pulled it together for this first book to be all that I learned about unconditional self-love. And so, and I wrote about my experience as well. When I first wrote this book, I had a draft and I sent it to people I know, some friends, some colleagues, some spiritual teachers, and every single one of them said, where are you in this book? We love what it says, but you need to talk about yourself. And I was like, oh, I have to be vulnerable? I have to share like what's really going on with me? I was like, I didn't like that idea at all. And so I started arguing with all of them. But I've learned that if I hear something from more than one person, there's probably something for me to listen to. And so then I went back and I added my experience in it. And it felt really good to do that because I got, as a psychotherapist, I got used to not talking about myself. You sit there for an hour with somebody and they talk about themselves and you help them with what they're struggling with. And so I just was really not sharing myself. And so in sharing myself, I just found joy. I found a place that was inside me that felt so good, which is something I wasn't doing. So this is a very long answer to how I wrote this book. It wasn't the way I had written the other books on my shelf. I mean, this book came to me, and I had to take the pieces of it that fit the unconditional self-love focus and put those in here and, do the usual things like editing because there were a lot of redundancies and things like that. But it was really an amazing process to write this book.
That's awesome. I think it's powerful. It's a powerful book, and I've read it, and I definitely think it's a wonderful read. I think, though, one of the things that we're missing in our society for the most part, and we have the power to create it, we have the power to be it, but it's being mindful, and it's something that I find most people aren't on that trajectory. Most people are in the thinking mind, and they're stuck in that thinking mind about what happened yesterday, the fear of what might happen now, what might happen tomorrow. And we're not thinking about we're not in the present moment. And even when we're in the present moment, we're overthinking it. We're either on the phone, we're in a meeting, we're not focused, and we don't take time. And, one of the things that, I know is such a big deal to you is being present and being, in that moment. And so tell me, when you're working with some of your clients, how do you explain to them presence and how to get there, the kind of the quickest way,
Yeah, well, we tend to fall in two camps. Either the people that are dragging the past into the present, so the past is leaking into our present, and so we're thinking about regrets, or I should have said this to that person, or I can't believe that happened, or I feel so bad about this, and the guilt, or we're thinking about the future, like really thinking about the future, hyper thinking about that, imagining a future, which some people have the ability to imagine a wonderful future, but a lot of people have the ability to imagine a very anxiety-provoking future. And so the first thing I think that helps people to live in presence is to do meditation, to actually just be present in meditation. It's a very different experience than everyday ordinary reality. Even if one finds that if you find that you can't meditate, you can't get there, you're aware. You're now aware of random thoughts coming in and oh, I feel uncomfortable and things that you're not even aware of normally. And so developing the habit of meditation is so powerful. And then the mindfulness, of course, one thing that's really helpful for that is to learn to do one thing at a time. We are doing 27 things at a time. Probably that's an exaggeration, but usually 3 or 4, checking the phone out, listening to somebody, writing, so we're doing so many things at the same time, and that takes us out of the present moment. I mean, we have so little energy available to the present because we're scattered, and so it's bringing that, allowing ourselves to even try to do the dishes just by being with the dishes, or to take a walk and just really notice everything that's there instead of taking a walk, but kind of listening to a video or something that takes you away from there.
Amazing information. And Noemi's going to be back here in our next segment, and you're going to be offering us some tips on how we can self-love and how to love ourselves. And that's going to be some powerful stuff that, we can use in our day-to-day life. So I look forward to that. We'll be back just in a moment. So live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashey Berges. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashey Berges.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashey Berges. On today's show, we've been talking about unconditional self-love. We've been talking about the power of that, and joining me in studio, Noemi Grace. Noemi is the writer of the most recent book, An Intimate Dialogue with God, The Miraculous Power of Unconditional Self-Love. She's the author of that book. She's a psychotherapist. She's a soul healer. And, right before the break, I was saying that we were going to get into how our listeners can, take some of these ideas and really use that into their own life. So let's dig into how we can unconditionally love ourselves and some tips, Noemi, on how to make that a reality.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Ashey. So the first thing I received were 2 questions, and they go like this. The first one is, what do I see if I look at this from love? And what do I do if I choose from love? And I was told to apply the first question to myself. So what do I see if I look at myself from love? Because there's a lot of judgment. We have so much self-judgment. And so even just catching, being aware, starting to notice how many times you have a thought that you're aware of that's self-judging. And so shifting out of that, actually taking a time out to say, what do I see when I look at myself from love right now? What can I see from eyes of love, which is this perspective of love, which means no judgment. So it's not like I'm nice, but no, the but is not love. And so practicing that every morning, I would start to say, what do I see when I look at myself from love? And I looked in the mirror eventually. At first I wasn't comfortable with that, but looking in the mirror, what do I see here? And I'm looking at myself from love. And when I do something that I'm not so happy with, what do I see when I look from love? Okay, I was really stressed today, or I was I just didn't feel cared for, and so I reacted. And so having compassion for yourself by seeing yourself from love. And the other thing is to choose what's self-loving. We wind up choosing a lot of times by the same mechanisms, and one of the ways that a lot of us choose is, we want to make sure that everybody's happy with that choice. And so if I have to choose something, the people important, are they going to be happy? And while, of course, we want them to be happy, if they're going to be happy at our own expense, that is costing us. It may not be costing them, but it's costing us. Learning to look at yourself and your life from love and to make those choices that are self-loving. So skipping meals and not eating till 10 o'clock at night because we're too busy taking care of everybody else is an example that would not be self-loving. Finding a way to do that differently. I used to stay up too late to watch some movie that was too stimulating, and then I couldn't sleep. That wasn't self-loving, so I had to make that change. So those two things, and also another thing that was so powerful for me was I was given this statement, and they called it a context. The divine called it a context, which is, I love myself enough to. Every day, ask myself, what do I love myself enough to do differently? What do I love myself enough to do differently today, and be willing to do that? And if we can say to ourselves, I love myself enough to do this, and that caused me to stop working with a spiritual teacher, to actually talk to people in relationships, to say, when you speak to me that way, it really hurts my feelings. To stand, not just take it all and suck it up, but to actually have a voice. And so, because it is not self-loving to have no voice. Our voice is part of us. And self-love, we love all of us. We accept and embrace all of us. And so those three things really helped me. And they're so small and simple. It's just changing the perspective, but it really helped me. And, it wasn't something that had to, and I've been using them with my clients, and it wasn't something like, okay, now you need to meditate for half an hour every day. And I was meditating every day, and I still do most days, and that really helps me a lot. But even just changing the way you look at yourself and the way you make the choices, that makes an extraordinary difference in your life.
It really does. It really does. Actually being able to think about that and put those things first. It's interesting also just being kind to yourself. I find that many of us have a tendency of not being very kind to ourselves. We see the absolute worst. We look in the mirror. We get upset. We poke fun at ourselves. We blame ourselves for things. And a lot of this goes back to, the beginning of our historical record. We have to get right with some of the stuff that we dealt with growing up as a child. And so many of us have those self-esteem issues, the self-worth issues. We don't feel like we're good enough. We don't feel valuable. And because we don't feel valuable or we don't feel like we're good enough, what happens then? Well, there's a tendency to not have love for self because we're finding all the faults. Right? And think about how many times often we'll take a friend, for example, and we'll take care of them and we'll be there for them and we'll build them up. But how many times are you doing that for yourself? Most people listening right now do not build themselves up. You do everything for the outside world. And when it comes to you, you're starving. And Noemi, I think you can understand that. It's like, when we're at that point, and I've been there about 20 years ago. I took that year off and I figured out myself, and it was crazy. I mean, I had to put the phone down. I had like the Jedi grip on that phone, hoping and praying that I wouldn't have to deal with myself, and I had to really get real with myself. I had to spend time with myself. I had to learn about myself. I had to find out how to take care of myself. I had to start cooking for myself. I had to really get into me to realize, because I had been in relationships and, doing all that stuff, not focusing on me, walking on eggshells, doing that codependent dance that I talk about. And I've done it. And I think many people out there listening right now are in that same position. You're doing that codependent dance. You're trying to make someone else happy. You're walking on eggshells to keep the peace. But when it comes down to it, it's not even about losing identity anymore. It's about, what is your identity?
Absolutely. And we do lose ourselves. And we don't know who we are after a while, especially in codependent relationships, which you mentioned a few times. And it's so many of us can get into that. And the more caring you are, the easier it is to get into a codependent relationship. Because in the codependent relationship, you have one person that is willing to do more and is willing to do their part, the other person's part, and even beyond that, and is willing to make up for what isn't being done, what isn't being attended to, is willing to settle for less and less and less over time, is willing to settle for no affection, for no positive affirmations, for no interest from another person, because you're so caring of the other person, and it costs us so much. It's really selling your soul to keep the other person okay. And the other person may be also doing this for the family. So the sacrifice of self, you lose yourself to it. And in that, the cost is really great because, as we talked earlier, we're here to learn to love ourselves. We're here to learn to love ourselves, to heal ourselves, to become ourselves. And if we don't take care of ourselves, if we do for everyone else and put us at the bottom of the plate or even off the plate, we are not going to be able to do any of that. And in the end, we become unappreciated by the people we've sacrificed ourselves for, because a lot of times it becomes very easy for them to expect the sacrifice. And then it's easy to become resentful. Why do I always have to sacrifice? Unfortunately, we created part of that dynamic. And so, to free yourself from codependency is really a good early step in self-love.
And it's something that you can't avoid. Some people say, well, can I get through this? Can I just let go of that since I've been codependent my whole life? Can I get past that and come back to that? And it's like, no, I mean, that's part of the concept of self-realization. It's part of the fact of accepting self. And one of the things, too, is we got to be okay with being on our own. And that's one of the things that I think most people are scared about, is not having another person there. They'd rather be with someone else instead of being alone, no matter how toxic being with the other person is.
Oh, absolutely. We get told that, we get programmed, and we believe that, we buy into this idea that being with somebody is better than being with nobody, and which means that being with somebody is better than being with yourself, because if you're with nobody, but you're really with yourself, and you like yourself, and you enjoy yourself, and you're kind to yourself, as you mentioned, that is a much better overall, in the long term, way to live your life than being with someone who's unkind to you or even abusive. But we have bought into what we've been told.
So true. When we return, we'll be talking more to Noemi about the book, and as well as to find out more about what she's doing, what she's working on, as well as how to find her on social media and her website. Stay tuned. We're going to be talking more about unconditional self-love. And also, if you haven't already, check out the YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, put in Ashey Berges, Berges. New content up every week, video content on relationships, codependency, toxic relationships, and the list goes on. So stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashey Berges, will be back in. We're back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashey Berges.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashey Berges. On today's show, we've been talking about unconditional love, revealing some concepts and ways that you can unconditionally love yourself. And joining me in studio, Noemi Grace, the writer and creator of The Intimate Dialogue with God, The Miraculous Power of Unconditional Self-Love, also psychotherapist and soul healer. Noemi, we were talking about unconditional love. We talked about the concept of the book. Let me ask you, besides the fact of really finding that unconditional self-love, what are some other things that you want your readers to take away from reading your book, from that experience?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that my book helps people discover is who they really are, because we have learned that we're our egos. We have learned that we're our behaviors. We've learned that we have this image of who we are that is not who we are. Who we are is so much deeper and more beautiful and more powerful. And the truth of who we are is just beyond where we have ever considered it to be. And so my book, An Intimate Dialogue with God, helps you discover your unique essence, which is a beautiful thing. It is you unveiled, like the diamond that's no longer in the rough. And it helps you to see who you truly are, because when you know who you truly are, it makes it a lot harder to judge yourself, a lot harder to reject yourself, a lot harder to diss yourself. And so that is one of the wonderful things that my book has for people. It also gives you more tools to help you love yourself and to live in the present moment where self-love lives. And it has practices also that you can use to deepen that. It's the meditation practices and different things that will help people and will help the readers. So.
Awesome. That's powerful. That's powerful. So I know that you're a psychotherapist. You're also a soul healer. Tell us more about the soul healing that you do with clients.
Oh, sure. I love soul healing work. So in doing soul healing, I had actually trained with a spiritual teacher who had shamanic background for 11 years, and I learned about the soul. And what that is who we are from a timeless perspective. And so a lot of times in psychotherapy, we're doing cognitive behavioral therapy. We're changing the way we think. We're changing our behaviors. And while that can lead to a much more satisfying life, there are often things that are resistant to that. They just don't seem to want to heal. And so in soul healing, we heal traumas. It's getting to the root. It's getting to the source of the problem, of the problematic behavior, or why you can't not do a certain thing or do a certain thing. And so sometimes there's been neglect that wasn't intended in childhood, or some kind of loss that set you on a pattern that you're not aware that that's what caused certain things in your life. And so soul healing, I like to say, heals what's resistant to psychotherapy. Those, like, you have things that are resistant to antibiotics, those super bugs and stuff. Well, soul healing is on steroids there. It will get to the source of the things that challenge us, the things that even torment us, and heal them so that they are healed, so we don't have to live that way anymore.
That's awesome. That's definitely necessary and needed, and a lot of people can benefit from that. Let me ask you, where do people find you? If they're looking for you, wanting to get the book, learn more about you, where can they go?
They can go to my website, noemigrace.com. That's Noemi Grace.com. And my book, An Intimate Dialogue with God, is on Amazon. And I do have an author, Noemi Grace, author Facebook page that I do posts on of bite-sized nuggets of divine wisdom at least once a week. So, but I also have a lot. I have a blog. I have a free ebook that people can download off of my website. So there's a lot of really great material to help you love yourself more deeply on noemigrace.com.
Awesome. I just think this is very powerful. It comes at a time when I think that a lot of us are sweeping this under the rug. Most people, I don't think, to some degree, even think about it because we don't really see our own value. And I think that for many folks listening to the show, we got to get right with you seeing your value, because if you don't see your value, you're not going to work on this stuff. A lot of times we see value outside of self. We see the value in other people, but we don't register that with ourselves. And so therefore we don't treat ourselves with respect or kindness. We don't take care of ourselves. We don't exercise, don't eat well. And processing all that, the way that we treat ourselves directly reflects on how we feel. And so when we put ourselves out there and actually start doing things, and I'm not talking about spa days and all that stuff. Well, definitely that's something, but I'm talking about, like going to the doctor, taking care of yourself, eating properly, learning what's best for your body type, what kind of food is best for your blood type, really thinking about that kind of stuff, if you're feeling bad, taking care of yourself and becoming your own best friend. And that's something that I think is powerful, because if you can understand who you are and you can figure out what you're about and you can love yourself unconditionally, then you can understand how to love other people unconditionally. Because if we're loving ourselves conditionally, which is where most of us were raised from, a conditional family dynamic, we're loving ourselves conditionally based on how much money we make at work or the grades you get at school or whatever, or how you look in the mirror, and that is not what love is.
Oh, so true, Ashley. So well said. And we have not valued self-love. We haven't found that to be important. And when we do make that a priority and we deepen our self-love, now we're not going to do things for others at our own expense. We're not going to say yes when inside there's a screaming no. We're going to change the way we interact with ourselves and with the people in our lives and with the world. It's a very different experience of life. Everything in your life may stay the same, but you are a different person living that life.
So true. Well, do you think you'll come back on Live Your True Life Perspectives?
Oh, I would love to. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, I look forward to. I know you have more books in the works, so I look forward to and I look forward to talking with you at more greater detail as well in next interviews. I appreciate you coming on. And again, where can the folks find you? What's the website again?
NoemiGrace.com. NOEMI Grace GRACE.com.
Well, I appreciate you for coming on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley. It's been a pleasure.
You know, I think we've learned a lot today on the show. We've talked about unconditional love. We've been offered suggestions and ways of creating that and really focusing on that and really kind of getting that out of our head and becoming even more mindful on what truly matters. Share this with your friends and family and live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashey Berges, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.